Hello, this is part of my series on what the Financial Times has said about Europe and the currency war. Well, the UK government said they would consider a limited change to European Union treaties to improve the bloc's economic governance, giving hope to Germany's campaign to install a permanent mechanism to resolve the sovereign debt crisis in the Eurozone. That's why the video is called Germany Saves Europe. The mechanism is a top priority for Angela Merkel, German Chancellor, who wants to replace the 3-year €440 billion, that's $600 billion, rescue fund that was cobbled together in May during the Greek debt crisis that threatened the euro. And that, of course, was caused by the banking system it was a monetary crisis, not a fiscal crisis. The fiscal crisis is tax and spending. A monetary crisis caused by the central banks printing too much money. And of course, Europe has had to absorb all the money that the Federal Reserve has printed, over $14.4 trillion. That's what caused the debt crisis. But the Financial Times continues. But doing so will require changes to EU treaties, which must be ratified by all 27 member states. In a surprise deal on Monday, Ms Merkel persuaded Nicolas Sarkozy, the French president, to agree to negotiate changes in return for softer rules to compel Eurozone members to curb their debt and budget deficits. After the deal with Paris, the UK government, which is traditionally hostile to any suggestion of a treaty change, will propose the next stern test. A UK government spokesman said, "We will look at any proposals. The stability of the Eurozone is important to us, but we would not accept anything that involves transfer of power from Westminster to Brussels." So a pretty standard British response from the Tory party. But this guy was a civil servant. Ms Merkel will get a clear indication of other governments' views at a meeting of heads of European states in Brussels next week. That meeting will also be an occasion to soothe the hurt feelings over Germany's decision to back away from budget rules that would impose near automatic sanctions on transgressors. I think that's what Noon 1999 was talking about in his vid. Why he hates Germany. European diplomats expressed surprise and irritation at Germany's motives a day after it caved in to French demands to give financial ministers greater say before penalties could be imposed. Several northern European states, including the Netherlands and Sweden, and the European Commission, that's the European Civil Service, the European Commission, had looked to Ms Merkel as leading the fight for tough sanctions, in quotes. I'm a little bit surprised that we did not have full 100% backing for fiscal discipline, that's discipline over tax and spending, from Germany, said Anders Borg, Swedish finance minister. We could have reached a little bit further, but we have made so much progress. In Berlin, senior government officials said that they had dropped their insistence on the automatic sanctions only after realising that no majority among member states were for the proposal. In addition to France, Italy, Belgium, Spain and other highly indebted governments, were all Mediterranean governments, were wary of the near automatic sanctions without the possibility of some political intervention. The precise details of the sanctions are still being agreed. In the meantime, the debate is already shifting in terms of the crisis mechanism. Berlin envisions measures that would allow for orderly restructuring for member states unable to service their debts, including loans with strict conditions attached, so Germany would be loaning out to other countries. A key component is that it would force private creditors to bear part of the cost of any restructuring, something that would encourage them to better price the risk of various Eurozone sovereign bonds. French officials opposed that feature because they fear it would lead to destabilising speculation against weaker Eurozone members and risk debt service costs for cash-strapped European governments. It could also give rise to higher spreads between German debt and that of other Eurozone members, they warn, comparatively. But the French ultimately dropped their proposal to the idea of treaty change because they accepted that it was the only way that Germany would consider some form of extension to the currency rescue fund. They also supported a German plan to strip voting rights from member states that violated the new budget rules, a measure that would also require treaty change. That was from the Financial Times, and this also is the Financial Times' editorial comment. After a series of tiffs, France and Germany are doing deals again. In exchange for weaker sanctions on the states breaching EU public debt and deficit rules, France on Monday acceded to German demands to reopen the European Union's treaties as a prelude to creating a permanent mechanism to resolve future sovereign debt crisis. The deal is both good and bad news, in the Financial Times opinion. The good news is that it will raise the chances that the EU will countenance the possibility of sovereign debt default. The advantages of formal mechanism are obvious. It would spare taxpayers the pain of having to bail out fiscally incompetent governments, and it would encourage markets to discipline governments indulging in overly lax fiscal policies. But have they actually, in my opinion, been fiscally lax? I doubt it. This was a monetary crisis, Financial Times. In a union, that's the European Union, that has shown no aptitude for this task, the threat of default may be the best way of avoiding irresponsible borrowing and lending. Some countries fret that this would raise their borrowing costs. That is exactly the point, and I agree with the Financial Times there. But the main reason we're in debt is because we bailed out the banks and gave them trillions and trillions of pounds and euros. The bad news is twofold. First, the concessions secured by France have pulled almost all the teeth from the sanctions proposed by Europe's financial miscreants. Under the Commission's proposals, as a European civil service, fiscal delinquents would have been hit by sanctions unless a majority of states voted against. Under the deal, sanctions would only be imposed if financial ministers voted. First of all, that country has breached the rules, and then, 6 months later, it has done nothing to rectify this. This may be slightly tougher than the expected current regime. However, to expect member states to punish colleagues in a position in which they may soon find themselves is stretching credibility. Leaving sanctions to the caprice of member states also increases the chance that only small states will be punished. This is bad for European unity. On that subject I agree. The toothlessness of the new proposals makes the case for a restructuring mechanism more compelling. But the second piece of bad news is that the creation is far from assured. Treaty changes would require all 27 member states to agree. Germany itself may struggle to convince its constitutional court to allow treaty change, and the vagueness of the deal gives opponents of sovereign debt default mechanisms wiggle room. The crisis that hit Europe in May has barely receded, so it is worrying that the continent's resolve to address its fiscal problems shows signs of ebbing. If Europe fails to learn the lessons of the late financial crisis, the next one will remind it all the more painfully. But of course, this was a monetary crisis caused by the financial delinquency of the Federal Reserve, not the European Union. The social market of the European Union produces to the point of maximum social benefit, and so also the ECB has kept to its inflation target of 2%, whereas the Federal Reserve has had to export its inflation over $14.4 trillion, which we are now having to pay for. Thank you for listening.